Okay, so we're going to start our next session. And for this next session, we'll have the opportunity, again, to have breakout discussions and so forth. Go ahead and stay where you're seated right now. When we break to get into the small group discussion, I'll encourage you to maybe consider switching seats so you get a different group. But before we get into the small group discussion, again, we're going to have a presentation that kind of leads into our topic. So we're in for a treat here. We have a remote presenter, and the technology seems to be working for us today. Yay. So I am going to introduce, and very pleased to introduce, Pete Berthelsen. Pete Berthelsen is at Pheasants Forever. He's been employed there since 1991, and in his current role, he is the Director of Habitat Partnerships. So we were just talking about the value of partnerships. I think Pete is our guy to kind of segue into our business case discussion. Pete works with the organization and its staff to develop and expand partnerships that help deliver the organization's mission. An organizational priority of Pheasants Forever is to pursue opportunities that positively impact the establishment of high-quality habitat for pollinator species. Prior to being at Pheasants Forever, Pete had worked with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in North Dakota, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and the U.S. Forest Service in Michigan. So with that, I will turn things over to Pete to begin.
Thank you, Iris. Does it sound like everybody can hear me okay?
Yep, you're in good shape.
Okay, well, modern technology. I will say that I've never given a presentation just wearing my Crocs before, but that's one of the advantages I guess you have when you're giving it by a webinar. It's a little bit more casual. So with that, I'll slide into the presentation. Iris has asked me to talk a little bit about pollinator habitat and some of the different aspects that I've learned throughout my career working on establishing and managing and designing habitat. So with that, let's see, my slide is not advancing. Hang on a moment while I work on technology on my end. Okay, we'll do it this way. All right, since most of you don't know who I am, I'll give you just a brief introduction to add to what Iris had to say. But my wife and I reside in central Nebraska, and have a farm and a ranch here that we manage and enjoy, and it's located in the beautiful central Luss Hills of Nebraska, which is rolling topography that's divided almost evenly between rangeland and agriculture. And I'm also a novice hobbyist beekeeper to kind of follow some of my pollinator passions, but really what I am is somebody that's very passionately interested in getting high quality habitat on the landscape. And this actually happens to be a photo that was taken just Monday morning on our farm. So with that, I'll slide into a little bit, excuse me, a little bit of today's discussion, and I'll kind of be talking about a couple of different things today. How to design some seeding mixtures and some of those considerations, and a little bit about management. And then Iris said that cost effectiveness and cost considerations were something that was very important to the group, so I'll kind of be talking a little bit about that as well. But before I go into those topics, I just kind of start each presentation that I give out talking about how there's been a lot of significant changes on the landscape. And if you're interested in things like wildlife and pollinators and those sorts of things, there's been a lot of dramatic changes that have been happening, and I like to always kind of put this slide up on the screen at the start of my presentations because I think that it really kind of talks about and reflects on what some of those different changes have been. And this happens to be a slide that shows where over a 4-year period, about 24 million acres of the country that was not in cropland and was primarily in grassland has been converted to cropland. And most of those changes occur in the areas of the Midwest and the Great Plains where there's been some dramatic changes. So that just kind of leads into what I think one of the real foundations of my organization, Pheasants Forever, is about, and that is about trying to take every acre that we touch and we work on and make that into the best possible habitat that it can be. There's not as many acres of habitat on the landscape, so it really, I think, puts a real set of importance on when we work on habitat projects, trying to make sure that those are the best that they can be. And that's where things like working with pollinators and other things that you folks there today are interested in is such a clean and easy tie. So with that, I will get into some of the different discussion points today, and I'm going to talk about some key considerations for developing high-quality habitat. And when I say high-quality habitat, we can be talking about pollinator habitat, we could be talking about grassland bird habitat, monarch butterfly habitat, high-quality habitat for a whole range of species. And over the course of my career in working with habitat, I've really come down to the fact that there are 3 pillars that have to be considered when we talk about how to get high-quality habitat. And those are the 3 pillars that I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about today: site preparation, seed mixture design, and then management of the habitat that goes in there. So I'm going to start out with what I call pillar number 1, and that is site preparation. Contrary to what you might see or hear on television, we do not yet have a time machine. And what I mean by that is when I work with landowners to establish high-quality habitat, all of the landowners start out the journey thinking that this is exactly what they want their habitat project to look like. They want it to have lots of color, lots of wildflowers. They want it to look like what the calendar that you have in your office looks like when you turn to the month of June and July. Unfortunately, for many landowners, what ends up happening is in the first year or 2, the project looks like this, and after 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, it looks like that. And I guess the point out of this statement is that because we don't have a time machine, I tell landowners all the time that it is critical that you put all the effort that you can into designing your project and then making sure that you have performed the correct site preparation and are planting it in the right way. Because the most frustrating thing for me is when we are 4 or 5 years down the line and a landowner or an agency or a corporation is not satisfied with the results of that project. That's the most, to me, the most expensive part of the whole project is if we're not happy and we have invested 4 or 5 years into the project, that's a really, really high cost. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the factors related to site preparation that I think are real critical. And the first is planting depth. And just like agriculture has changed, and changed a lot from old farm equipment like this to more modernized farm equipment, how we think about planting high-quality habitat has changed a lot. And here's my example of what I mean by that. When we're establishing high-quality, highly diverse habitat, not all seeds are created equal. And in this example, I have 5 species here that have great pollinator value, great wildlife habitat value, but they vary dramatically in their seed size. All the way from the smooth milkweed species where 70,000 seeds make up a pound, to slender beard's tongue that takes 10.8 million seeds to make 1 pound. That's a difference of 153 times from the one end of the spectrum to the other. So when we are talking about establishing highly diverse habitat, we have to take things like this into consideration as we are using more advanced seeding mixtures. So as you look at the size of these different seeds in here, think about some of the rules of thumb related to planting seeds. And one of those rules of thumb is that the appropriate planting depth for that seed is about twice the diameter of the individual seed. So a species like smooth milkweed might be able to handle being planted as deep as 1/4 of an inch into the ground, but a species like slender beard's tongue, if it was planted into the ground 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch or maybe even 1/8 of an inch, would not be able to germinate, grow, and show up in your planting. That's a pretty critical factor. If you've been using high diversity mixtures that have lots of species in there, and some of them are species that are incredibly small. This is like dust, some of these species that have millions of seeds in a pound. If those seeds are not left almost on the top of the ground, they likely will not show up in your seeding mixture. So planting depth is a really critical factor. So how do we determine planting depth? Well, one of the ways can be using a no-till drill that has depth control mechanisms with it. If your drill cannot accurately control the planting depth of your seeds, that could be a real significant factor in the success of your planting. And then we want to make sure that we're using drills that have the ability to handle fluffy seeds and things like that, like we see in this particular box of the drill. Another seeding method to consider, especially when we're talking about seeds that are so incredibly small, is broadcast seeding. And broadcast seeding can be accomplished in a manner like this one. This is a fertilizer spreader that actually just kind of drops the seed on the top of the ground, all the way to the more traditional kind of Johnny Appleseed, throwing the seed around on the ground, or using a broadcast seeder that kind of slings the seed out there on the ground. As long as we can ensure that we're getting seed-soil contact, broadcast seeding can be a really effective method of going about seeding. And if you think about it, this is how most of the plant species naturally populate themselves, through the dispersal of seed onto the ground by broadcast seeding. So if I back this up and we look at this picture right here, which happens to be broadcast seeding into corn stubble that has been shredded, this seed will have ample seed-soil contact. There will be all kinds of seed-to-soil contact. If we were trying to broadcast seed into something that had existing grass, very likely we wouldn't get the seed-to-soil contact that we need. So site preparation and thinking about how we're going to seed the species and the size of the seeds is really, really important. When we're thinking about broadcast seeding and things like that, one of the things that I'm a real strong proponent of is doing what we call a dormant seeding. Seeding those species in the fall at a time in the year late enough so that they will not germinate this year, but lie there on the ground or in the ground over the winter, and then have that freezing and thawing action kind of help break some of the seed dormancy. And that's really important if we're using species like are showing up on the screen right now that require some sort of stratification to break their seed dormancy. A freezing and thawing action, having the seed coat roughed up a little bit. Some of these species that may take several years to show up in a mixture can show up quicker when we use a dormant seeding in the fall and the winter. That freezing and thawing action can help quite a bit in getting those species to show up. Right now I wanted to pass along just a couple of thoughts about planting high diversity habitat into existing grass and cover. And the first thing that I'll tell you is that when we are trying to perform an upgrade on an existing grass stand, or we're trying to take a grassy area and convert it into something that's high diversity and has lots of forbs in it, it's hard. In this photo right here, what we're doing is applying a glyphosate application to an existing stand and then starting over. One of the experiences that I can tell you, and it's very frustrating, but you can just about engrave it in stone. If I had two fields side by side, and one of them was in existing grass like this, and one of them was in crop stubble like corn or soybeans or milo or something like that, even though we have sprayed and killed off this field, the planting, side by side, the planting that would go into the crop stubble would establish quicker and have more diversity in it than a seeding that will go into an existing grass stand. It's very, very challenging to get a high diversity planting established into an existing grass stand, even when we've killed it off, in this case with a herbicide. The next thing that I'll talk about for consideration is a fall glyphosate spraying. And in this example, in this field right here, we have a fair amount of grass. And this spraying is happening in late fall, early winter, when all of the forbs in the field have gone dormant for the year, but many of the cool season grasses are still actively growing. And in this example, we put a glyphosate application on at a rate of 2 quarts per acre. And none of the wildflowers that we want to stay in there that has that diversity are impacted because they've gone dormant, but the grasses are impacted by the herbicide application. And in my next photo, I have a little bit of an example.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you pause just a second? We had a computer that fell asleep here, so we're not seeing your image.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem. It's very quiet in the room.
We're here. We're here. Okay, so we're back, and it's fall glyphosate spraying. That's the screen we see.
Okay. So was Iris, can you help me? Was this image up while I was explaining what was happening in this field?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So this is a fall spraying in which we're trying to remove the grasses that are overtaking this planting. And my next image is an example following a prescribed fire that shows what this looks like. And in this example here, in the unsprayed portion of the field, you have lots of green grass that's coming up following the prescribed fire. And in the area that was sprayed, the grasses have been removed, and this will now be dominated by forbs and have lots of great pollinator value to it. So if you have a habitat project that is being overtaken by grasses, which that's pretty natural, that's natural succession, a fall glyphosate spraying, as we've talked about here, can do great things. And I'll kind of come back to that a little bit later on. So hopefully not too many projects that people work on look like this in the first year, but if it does, we absolutely have a weed control competition issue to think about. And I'm going to give several examples of my experience coming up here about how we can think about and plan for early weed control. So we'll talk about that in just a second, but first I'll tell you that our friends at the Tallgrass Prairie Center in Iowa have been doing some research on the impact of taking high diversity habitat projects. In this example, they're trying to replicate tallgrass prairie, and they have been having great success by going out and using frequent mowing in year one. And this is an example of a study that you might find very interesting and want to check out. And just one example from the study, a couple of photos that they sent me. This happens to be grayhead coneflower, and they would have plots that were planted the exact same way, side by side. And this is an example of a grayhead coneflower plant that was not mowed, and this is a grayhead coneflower plant from the plot side by side that was mowed frequently the first year. And what they're trying to show is that they actually had better forb growth and response and establishment through frequent mowing in year one. So if you go back and you look at this study, and maybe you want to jot that down, that might be something that would be of interest to you in your future management. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is in different areas of the country, this varies, but in some areas of the country, people are very interested in going out and doing lots of site preparation that involves full-on tillage of the field prior to planting. Personally, I'm not a big fan of full-on tillage prior to planting high diversity habitat projects, because in too many cases, this is the response that I see. And for those of you that might be unfamiliar with this particular visitor to the grasslands, this is musk thistle, which in my part of the world is a noxious weed, so you're required by law to go out and control it. And unless you have a nephew like I do that can be convinced to go out and pluck musk thistle heads simply for the cost of a pizza and a pop, this can be a very costly control issue and can be very impactful to the establishment of your habitat project. So my comment and my cautionary note about doing full-on tillage prior to planting is that if you have a site that has any known history of noxious weeds, even if it's been, you've had grass planted there for 10 years, 20 years, something like that, if you go out and you scratch the ground again with disking or some other sort of full tillage, those species will come back, and they'll come back with vigor. So those are some cautionary thoughts that I give you about that kind of site preparation. So now I'd like to move on to pillar number 2 and talk a little bit about some of the considerations about designing and using seed mixtures. And the first thing that I would pass along is just how really important it is, if we're designing high quality habitat projects, to make sure that we have flowering species throughout the entire growing season. In most areas of the country, that's April to October. And as a wildlife professional, it's really easy for me to design a seeding mixture that's cost effective, that will do real well with all the species that are showing up on the screen right now. But there's a problem. Every one of these species that's on the screen flowers in the month of June and July. And if we dominate our seeding mixture with species that just flower in the months of June and July, we have not provided critical habitat needs throughout the entire growing season. So it's really important when we're designing our mixture that we're thinking about that whole season. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute as well. I think the other consideration that we need to have when we're designing seed mixtures is we need to think about lots of different size, shape, and color to the wildflower species that we're putting in our mixture. Because when it comes to pollinator species, many different pollinators some are attracted to just certain colors, some need certain size and shape flowering parts. We need to have a lot of diversity out there, and we need to have lots of different size, shape, and color. So I've been talking a lot about high diversity seeding mixtures, and now I want to talk about what seems to be one of the big concerns, and that's that, well, if we have high diversity, it also seems like we have high cost. And when we're designing seeding mixtures that have all of these different species that come in all these different seed shapes and sizes and all the other things that we've talked about, we hear lots of stories about seeding mixtures that can cost anywhere from $100 an acre to $600 an acre, or maybe even more. I want to talk a little bit right now about what might perhaps be new to some of you about how seeding mixture design can a little bit artificially increase the price of your seeding mixture. And I want to tell this story by telling you about two of my favorite wildflower species that I want to include in each habitat mixture I design. And the first one is called showy partridge pea. It's flowering right now at this time of the year. It's found throughout the entire eastern half of the country, and it is a very significant pollinator species. But the other thing is it is just about the least expensive wildflower species that you can buy based on the price per pound. $13.59 a pound. Very inexpensive for a wildflower species. Next, I want to tell you about another wildflower species that I love called slender beard's tongue. Slender beard's tongue flowers early in the year. It's really critically important for like bumblebee species as they're kind of coming out of hibernation and that sort of thing. But slender beard's tongue has a little bit of a problem. It is the most expensive wildflower species that I have in my calculator. Almost $2,000 a pound. That's pretty expensive, and in most cases, as a manager or somebody that's designing a seed mixture, you might look at that and say, well, we can't really afford to put that in a seeding mixture. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story about these two species. And the first is, we've talked about the price. Big, big difference in price. One is the least expensive, one is the most expensive. They have really different seed sizes. Showy partridge pea, 43,000 seeds make up a pound, and with slender beard's tongue, 10.8 million seeds make up 1 pound of seed. Vastly, vastly different. If I was to try and get one plant to show up every 4 square feet in a seeding mixture, and that might be a real appropriate seeding rate in a highly diverse seeding mixture, in 4 square feet of ground, I would have 1 plant that would germinate and grow at 0.25 seeds per square foot. Well, to have 0.25 seeds per square foot of showy partridge pea, I need to plant 0.25 pounds per acre. To have the exact same seeding rate of slender beard's tongue, I need to put 1/1000th of a pound of seed per acre. Very different. And when we look at that seeding rate, the price of the least expensive forb species is $3.40 an acre. Not too bad. The cost per acre of the most expensive wildflower species, $1.99 an acre. The cost of that species per pound is not nearly as important as the seed size and the seeding rate. Hopefully, if this is new to you, I hope that what I've just said here kind of resonates with you, because what I'm going to show you next is how most places design seeding mixtures. What I've just shown you here is how we design seeding mixtures based on seeds per square foot. That's the absolute way you want to design your seeding mixtures. That can have a big influence on cost. Unfortunately, using these same two species, this is how most places still design their seeding mixtures. They do it all by pounds per acre and not seeds per square foot. So we have our same species where we know the cost, and we know how many seeds there are in a pound and that sort of thing. If I was to put both of these species into the mixture at 0.25 pounds per acre, and remember, this is how most places still do it, pounds per acre and not seeds per square foot. In showy partridge pea, I would have 0.25 seeds per square foot. And in slender beard's tongue, I would end up having 62 seeds that would germinate and grow in 1 square foot of ground. What does that do to the cost? Well, the cost of showy partridge pea didn't change. The cost of slender beard's tongue, almost $500 an acre. So remember some of these numbers, because in just a minute I'm going to show you some examples of some pollinator seeding mixtures and what they look like, and you'll see some of these exact things happening in those seeding mixtures. So what I'm going to show you right now is called a seed calculator, and this is exactly how we need to design seeding mixtures going forward when we're talking about high diversity seeding mixtures. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this and show you some of the aspects of a seed calculator. We can enter the seeding rate based on the pounds per acre. In this case, you can either do it at that species at 0.3 of a pound, or here's one at 0.003 of a pound. The main thing that you want to look at is how many seeds per square foot is each species putting out there. How many seeds per square foot? So in 1 square foot of ground in this mixture, we would have 0.43 Missouri goldenrod seeds that would germinate and grow. So you'd have 1 plant every 2 square feet, basically. And that's how we want to think about designing seeding mixtures going forward. And then it also allows you to know what the cost is for each species in the mixture. Some of the other attributes that this will tell you when you're designing a mixture, and these are all important things to think about, is what's the ratio of wildflower seeds to grass seeds? That's a critically important factor that I'll talk a little bit more about. This particular seed calculator gives you a pollinator value to your mixture from 1 to 5. And the closer to 5 you are, the greater the pollinator value of your mixture. It's really important that we look at the entire growing season. And in this example, we have spread these species out so that we have at least 6 species in each bloom period. And then we're also able to know what the cost is. So when we look at this new thing called seeds per square foot, how do we kind of interpret what numbers should be? Well, depending on the goals and objectives of your project and where you're at in the country and how much moisture you get and all kinds of factors like that, your final seeding rate should probably be somewhere between 20 and 80 seeds per square foot. I would say more like 40 to 60 in a pollinator planting. So if you think about 1 square foot of ground, that would be 50 or 60 seeds that will germinate and grow into plants in 1 square foot of ground. If you're going above the 60 to 80 seeds per square foot, you will have so much competition in that planting that you'll probably kind of be doing the reverse of what you wanted. The competition will be so thick that some of the species in your mixture that take longer to establish will be outcompeted and won't show up in your mixture. So think about that. If you think that if a little is good and more is better, too much is not just right. If you have your seeding rate too high, you will be outcompeting some of the species in your mixture and they won't show up. The other factor to consider is what percentage of your mixture is forbs and what percentage of your mixture is grasses. And this is really important because we know that a seeding mixture is a balance beam. And that balance beam is grass. If grasses comprise more of that mixture than the forbs, they will always, always, always outcompete the forbs in your mixture. That's called natural succession. So let's look at an example of a right-of-way pollinator mixture that was sent in by one of our partners in the room today, and this is just an example of a seeding mixture to give you a few more things to think about. So let's take a closer look at this mixture. This is the actual pollinator mixture that was being proposed for use. And when we look at this, I see several things that jump out at me. The first is that Black-Eyed Susan at 1.38 pounds per acre is producing 50 plants per square foot in this seeding mixture. That's a really, really high seeding rate. That's 30% of the entire mixture. The next thing is that some species are considerably lower. Butterfly milkweed, it'll take 4 square feet of ground to get 1 plant to germinate and grow. And oh, by the way, if Black-Eyed Susan and some of these other species are planted at a really high rate, they're probably going to outcompete this butterfly milkweed that's going to take 2 years to show up in the mixture. Another thing that kind of jumps out is that it's almost 50-50. The grasses with time likely will come on pretty strong in this mixture and might produce some competition problems. If the goal was pollinators, this score could be a little bit higher. And it's even more important based on the fact that the highest species in the mixture has the lowest pollinator value score. So that's pretty important. The thing that dominates the mixture has the lowest pollinator score. And so if pollinators are one of your objectives, that's pretty important. And then the other thing is that if pollinators are an objective, we probably haven't really spread things out over the entire growing season quite as good as what we might be able to. So I'll just pass along that Pheasants Forever has developed a habitat standard to help guide us in terms of how we do some of these things. And that habitat standard talks about more than 50% of the mix needs to be forbs. That mixture did it. There needs to be over 40 species in the mixture. That particular one was a little bit short. There needs to be 1 or more milkweed species in the mixture. That one did it. It had 2. We need to have flowering plants throughout the entire growing season. They had some of that, and then we need to use a seed calculator. And my guess is that that mixture probably didn't quite do that. So a couple other things that we can and should think about when we're designing seed mixtures is how to plan for weed competition. And I have several ways in which we can think about weed competition when we're designing mixtures. The first is we need to make sure that we have plants in our seeding mixtures that are annuals that will show up real early in our planting so that they can help combat some of those weeds that will fill in the spots if we don't have species like this. And all of these species that are showing up on the screen right here are species that are annuals that will show up very early in the mixture, and we want to design that mixture so that we have those species in there to combat weeds. Another thing that can do that is if we think about natives versus introduced things, if pollinators are an objective, including some introduced legumes into the mixture, some of the different clovers and things like that will show up very quickly, have significant pollinator forage value, and help with competition going forward. Another factor that we need to consider when we're designing seed mixtures is what kind of soil are we planting this mixture into? Not all of the flowers, the pollinator species that we want to use, are going to show up in different soil types. Sandy versus silty versus clay is a big difference in all of those things. So we want to really think about what the soil type is and be selecting species that will do well in those mixtures. Wrapping up this part right here, I've talked about high diversity mixtures. High diversity is high quality. The more species that we can put into your mixture, the more we're going to be able to handle conditions like drought or a lot of water, a hot year or a cold year. The more species you put into that mixture, the more you're almost guaranteed that some species in that mixture is going to perform well that year, given the different conditions that you might have. And the last comment in this section about seed mixtures is to make sure that we always use a seed calculator, because if we aren't, we're not going to be able to take into factor all of those different things that we've talked about regarding how to design the best mixture. So the last of the three pillars is there's really nothing that we can do for a great high-quality habitat project where you plant it and walk away from it and always have great habitat. Things like woody encroachment coming into our plantings is pretty common. Some of the ways that we can control those things is by thinking about the use of prescribed fire. That may or may not work well in some of the different right-of-way properties, but the benefits of fire are the response of the forbs, the returning of the nutrients back into the soil, and maintaining that habitat project in a highly vigorous state. And one of the ways that we can think about doing that when we're establishing our project is using something like a green fire break so that we can control how that fire is put onto the landscape, and there can be a tremendous amount of pollinator value from these green fire breaks as well. If appropriate for the area, grazing, when done in the right way as a tool, can be a great project. This is an example of a high-quality prairie that had a fire run on it, and then it was flooded with cows for a short 2-week period of time with some high-intensity, short-duration grazing, and that exact same field looks like this 2 months later. So I guess my main comment about maintenance is that we need to do a little bit of it every year in order to have high-quality habitat. So I would just kind of close with a final thought for you today. A little bit of a personal thought, but a final thought, and that final thought is related to monarch butterflies. And for me, endangered species listing for the monarch butterfly is just simply not an option, something that we just can't allow to happen. If we look at the area of the country that has been identified as the most important if we want to do things for monarch butterflies, it's right in the heart of where you're meeting today, and you have a significant opportunity to do things for monarch butterflies going forward. We know that things like milkweed species are critically important to the life cycle of that iconic butterfly, that iconic insect species. It's not just monarchs, it's a highly diverse, high-quality habitat project. But one of the things that I want to pass along that maybe some of you aren't aware of is that recent research and modeling has identified that if we do nothing different from today going forward, the eastern monarch butterfly population has a 60% likelihood of extinction in the next 20 years. An 80% likelihood in the next 50 years. As a landowner, I care deeply and passionately about the landscape and the little piece of heaven that I have with my farm, and having that species end up being listed and the impact that it could and would have on the landscape is just something that I just think that we just can't allow to happen. And since Iris hasn't put me on mute yet and shut me down, I have one last final thought for you here today. And that last final thought is that when we're working on habitat projects, we need to use the there is safety in numbers plan. And the there is safety in numbers plan is whether you are a wildebeest on the plains of Africa with hungry lions around circling the deal, or you're somebody that cares about things like honeybees or monarch butterflies or native prairie or grassland songbirds or pheasants or quail or whatever. All of these species want and need and benefit from really the same kind of habitat. Highly diverse, high-quality habitat. And as I looked at your agenda and the things that you're talking about, I think that some of the things that you're talking about is how to get more stakeholder involvement, how to get the public involved. And that's where I'm just so convicted that pollinator habitat and high-quality, highly diverse habitat is the answer. And there's so many people that care about the same things, and they just don't know that we all really want the same kind of habitat. We all want the same thing, and we just need to think about how to talk about and explain what we want so that more of us can come together. Because highly diverse, high-quality habitat on the landscape is really what all of those things can benefit from, whether we're talking about right-of-way habitat or things in the agricultural landscape or somebody's backyard. We have the opportunity to benefit all of those things. And I would just close today with the fact that on a monthly basis, Pheasants Forever produces some short video habitat tips that cover almost every single thing I've talked about today, about how to control woody vegetation, how to design new seeding mixtures, great species for pollinator habitat, and all those kinds of things. They're free. You can sign up to have a link sent to you once a month, or you can go to our YouTube page and sign up to view and see those things, and I would encourage you to do so. So I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with all of you there today. I wish that I could have been there, but by modern technology, hopefully you've been able to get some value out of this. And so I appreciate your time and attention, and I'll turn it back over to Iris, and I will stay on the line.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Pete. I think we have time for maybe 2-3 questions. If, yep, and we'll get a microphone there so Pete, you can hear.
Sure.
Jim Alwell, Illinois Department of Transportation out of Peoria, Illinois. Was very interested in your habitat tip videos, and in our group discussions we were talking about I've got a problem with highway maintainers either mowing or spraying good prairie plants simply because they don't know what they are. They're born and bred on corn and beans, and they know what that is, and they'll leave that alone. But I'm wondering if Pheasants Forever could come up with a video that, like for maintainers, could show, okay, this plant is a rattlesnake master, and it may look like a little teasel, but no, don't spray it. I'm wondering if that could be put into the works in the near future.
Sure. Yep, two thoughts. First, what you're describing is not unique to Illinois. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's certainly not unique to your area, and that is absolutely a concern. So I guess my second point is I would ask if you would jot down my number and give me a call, and I would be happy to discuss the possibility of making a habitat tip about that and any other potential habitat tip topics that anybody else in the room might think of as well. I kind of slid back to that screen so people could jot down how to get a hold of that, but you can also, if you jot down my email and you send me an email and just say add me to your distribution list, I would be happy to do so.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Pete, I'll ask for one other final thought, if you wouldn't mind sharing. We're going to be breaking shortly to talk about, again, creating the business case and how within our organizations we can better justify these sorts of projects. Can you talk a little bit or provide a couple of thoughts on your strategy when you're working with new partners or approaching new landowners? How do you create the business case?
I guess one of the examples I would give is, so I've been with my current employer for 26 years, and for 26 years I've always talked about wanting the same kind of habitat on the landscape. Hasn't changed what I've wanted, how I've designed it, what I've been looking for, but now how I talk about it has changed significantly. And so how I talk about it is a lot of the message that I gave today, where I now talk about pollinators and honeybees and monarch butterflies and all of those other things. And that case for what you want and need on the landscape resonates with an audience now that is way, way, way bigger and wider. And so I don't know if that was answering the question that you were asking.
Yeah, that's
about okay, yep. So that, I guess I spend it's personally of interest to me, but it's also something that just really resonates with so much of a wider audience of people and organizations and agencies. And I'm obviously can't see everybody that's in the room, but I would predict to you that, that's a very wide, diverse audience that's represented in your room today, and that's a pretty good example of how this subject matter brings all those folks together.
okay. Great. Well, thank you again, Pete. Your contact information is still here, and wish you could have been here, but I'm sure we'll meet soon.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I hope you guys have had a good meeting and have a great rest of the meeting. Thank you.